Hi, folks. We're going to get started in a minute, and we have started recording already. And Jeff Kaplan is joining us by Zoom. That's him. We're waiting for one more board member here, but I think we're going to get started anyway. Yes. Okay. Thank you. This is the audit committee, and the sole agenda topic is the presentation of the FY 23-24 audited financials. Attending are Rob Williams and Jeff Jones from our auditors EFPR. Here in the room at Pier 40 is ID. My last name is Aranda, there you go. Plus Jeffrey LeFrancois and Antonia Pereira from DEC. And then the HRPT staff. So good morning, everyone. Welcome. And I'm going to hand it over to our guests.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Hopefully it's not too hot in the city for you today. It's a little hot and humid here.
But you're wearing your suit jacket.
Yeah. Luckily the AC is working.
Exactly. The AC is working well here too.
And there's electricity.
Jeff, do you have ability to share the document?
Yep,
they all have?
Clicking it right now. Sorry, 1 second. I think
it was there.
Oh, was there?
Yeah.
My screen popped up saying it wasn't.
Yeah, it's there now.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so we prepared this. It's a 3-page summary. I know everyone had received the draft financial statement. So after we get through this summary, if anybody has any specific questions on numbers, but this is a good summary of everything for the year ended March 31st, 2024. The financial statements and auditors reports were reviewed by the trust management. And we are issuing an unmodified, which in accounting terms is a clean opinion that the trust financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects for the year then ended. There's also a few reports in the back. One states that there's no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies were noted in the trust internal control over financial reporting or related to any laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements, and there was no non-compliance which could have a direct material effect on those financial statements. Additionally, the trust complied in all material respects with the Title II of the compilation of codes, rules, and regulations of the state of New York. That specifically relates to the investments. During the year, the trust adopted Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB 94, which had a deal with public, private, and public-public partnerships. So you'll see there's reclassifications made to the prior year and disclosures during the current year. It was a new GASB, kind of follows along with GASB 87, which was adopted last year. GASB 94, 2 of the leases fall under 94 as opposed to GASB 87. For the year, the net position for the trust increased a little over 54 million, so that to a total of over $1 billion now is your net position as of March 31st. Last year, I think it was like 983 million. You're now over the $1 billion net position, which is detailed in the financial statements. Your total assets, about 1.45 million as of March 31st. There's about a 5% increase over the prior year, primarily relating to new lease agreements and also an increase in capital assets. You'll see in the capital asset section, a lot of your construction last year, you did about $51 million this year, but about $107 million was considered completed and is now being depreciated for those improvements done to the park. Your total liabilities as of March 31st were about 45 million, very consistent with the previous year, about a 1% increase. And primarily the increase was due to actuarial assumptions for the trust, OPEB, and pension liabilities, offset by a decrease in accounts payable. Your deferred inflows of resources amount to about 371 million. There's a 5% increase. And that's primarily result of trust entering into new lease agreements during the year. As you recall, last year, GASB 87 has those deferred inflows related to those. For the revenue for the year, you had about 105 million during the year ended March 31st, about a 2% increase. Although there was a decrease in the amount of appropriations revenue, it was offset by two one-time payments for about $17 million that came in. One was from Amtrak, and the other one was related to a lease payment. Total expense.
Just hang on one second. I want to clarify one thing. The appropriations revenue is really the state and city contributions to capital. So it's not for operating, it's for the capital expenditures. It's reimbursing us for capital expenditures.
Yes, thanks for clarifying. Total expenses amounted to about 51 million during the year ended March 31st. It was about a 15% increase. That increase mainly was a result of the actuarial assumptions related to the pension systems, where the last year you now have a liability in the current year. That's something kind of out of the trust control. It's really the pension system for the state dictates what amount gets reported as your liability related to those investments or to the pension system. So that's a high level summary. The next page is really disclosing the summary of the changes in the statements in that position. These are all included in those financial statements. And as you go through your financial statements, just keep in mind that the notes provide greater clarity. So a lot of these amounts on the statement of that position may have further detail in those notes. For example, the GASB 87 regarding the leases receivable, that's further described in note 7 in those financial statements. Note 94, GASB 94 is described in note 8. So those notes really describe in greater detail the amounts that are disclosed here. And again, the capital assets, which are the 734 million, they're described in note 4. So these numbers, does anybody have any specific questions? You can see your construction in progress went down about 55 million. Again, that was just to improvements made to the park that while they're being performed, it's treated as construction in progress. Once that is completed, it then moves into the depreciable capital assets and is depreciated over its useful life. You had a lot of work completed, started years ago that was completed in last fiscal year, and now it's being depreciated over its useful life. You have a very healthy cash position for operating and investments, about 162 million. Liabilities, you can see down below, you now have a net pension liability, 4.7 million. Last year was an asset of 1,777,000. You have your deferred inflows of resources. Again, the GASB 94, it's a breakout. Last year, that was all shown as one line as GASB 87. Now it's broken out between GASB 87 and GASB 94.
Actually, can I ask a question on that? Thank you.
Sure.
I'm just reading the notes on the public-private partnerships, which I'm not familiar with. And could you just tell us a little bit, like, I think the note tells us some. When I look at the balance sheet of an entity like the Hudson River Park, I expect depreciable capital assets will be the bulk of it, which I see there. That's $750 million. Leases receivable, I understand. What's the fundamental distinction between the GASB 87 amounts and the GASB 94 amounts? Because I see one shifting from year to year, as you would expect, but the other stayed exactly constant, which I wouldn't have expected. So can you just tell us a little bit about sort of the content of what that receivable ends up being? I understand how we measure it and we discount the rates and all of that, but I don't fully get the rest of it.
Yeah, Jeff can clarify this very well.
Yeah, I'll jump into this one. So as Rob mentioned, last year, everything was under GASB 87, basically considered as a lease. This year, when GASB 94 was required to be implemented by the trust, what we had to do is assess all the leases to see if any of them qualified as a public-public or public-private partnership. The real distinction here is whether or not someone is leasing a trust asset or if they are going to be essentially having an owner-operator relationship. Now, just let's take, for example, Chelsea Piers. Now, the trust itself entered into an agreement where the operator had to essentially built an infrastructure asset, built up on the pier, are operating the asset. They get to, for example, There is, restaurants in
Oh.
there. The trust doesn't actually have control of that and say, okay, this is what you have to charge for a hamburger. This is what you have to charge for this. Instead, the operator has all these basically kind of leeway to do what they want. And at the end of the agreement, that asset that the operator has now built becomes an asset of the trust. So because of how that works, it's actually now getting reclassified over.
Gotcha.
So the actual lease itself did not change, just the way Gatsby wants us to.
The distinction between
Exactly.
level of
Exactly.
control, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So both Chelsea Piers and Pier 57 are.
Are the two that are in that, gotcha.
So will that number remain the same next year then? Okay.
This
Yeah.
is the first year it's implemented.
Got it.
Yeah, and one of the goals that they had with this is assuming that leases were going to be shorter term. Let's just take Chelsea Piers as a continued example. If the agreement itself was only a 10-year lease, then after 10 years, when the asset, all the infrastructure that was built by the operator at the end of the 10 years would be converted over and become the trust asset itself. It would have value. So because of that, at the end of, let's call it a lease term, the trust would be almost receiving a free asset. They'd be receiving a building. They'd be receiving, everything they built up in there. So that was really the distinction that Gatsby was trying to go with this, is making sure we can break out which is which, so that they know, okay, one is a true just leasing, the trust asset, and one is where the operator is building an asset that then they're going to operate themselves, and at the end of it, it then goes over and becomes the trust asset.
Got you. One is a stream of cash flows and the other has residual value.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I just follow on that? But if you're looking at then the difference between FASB and these two GASBs, if you add these, layperson, add 87 plus 94, you're getting to the same answer you would have under FASB. This is just a different way of breaking it out.
Correct, which is why these also agree to the same documents last year. The FASB is very similar to this. The only real difference when you look at FASB is FASB would actually allow them to essentially assess the lease as of the date of implementation through the remaining life, where GASB actually would require you to go back to the inception of the beginning of the lease and project out what the present value of the cash flows are from the day one of the lease. Those are the only real big differences that you would see between those two.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And Jeff, on the GASB 94, it's like a 95-year lease, right?
Yeah, Pier 57 is a 95-year lease. So again, if it would have been, let's say, a 10-year lease, one additional disclosure, one additional item we would have actually been to essentially record what the present value, or the net book value of that asset would have been on your books, also assuming that you would have received something, let's say, of substantial value at the end of the term. And no, I know you also referenced the question of why the call it the PPP, or public-private partnership receivable, didn't change from year to year, because the lease itself is 95 years and the cash payments made each year vary so much over 95 years. They actually accrue interest on it, which is why you see the interest changing in regards to 94 and not the initial receivable. It's kind of, if you think about it, kind of like a car loan. At the beginning of the loan, you're paying mainly interest and you're barely touching principal, or by the end of it, you're paying almost all principal on it. The same concept with this, but the only then difference is because the lease itself is so long, some of the total cash payments don't fully cover interest, so results in a receivable growing for the interest. Then by the end, though, it will be decreasing rapidly.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
And then, Jeff, you just go to the bottom of the page. You can see the net position, the net investment in capital assets, the 799 million, that equals the construction in progress and depreciable assets above when total together, because the trust doesn't have any debt. You're not allowed to, so there's no reduction there. So the net investment in capital asset represents those two numbers above. If you go to the next page, this is a summary of the statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in net position. Again, as you can see, the lease revenue was up quite a bit, as well as the fees and other revenue. Again, there was those two one-time payments for about $17 million. that occurred in 2024. They're again one time, so it's not expected to reoccur again. Your operating expenses remain pretty consistent, up just a little bit on the parks programs and maintenance. Again, a lot of the parks have been being complete. It's the upkeep of that. Down below, you can see your other operating revenue. Again, we broke it out between GASB 87, GASB 94, as well as the other OPEB and pension expense numbers. And last year, you can see it was a $99.8 million increase. This year is a $1.4 million expense. And down in non-operating revenue, again, the appropriations were down about 18 million. It's just less brought in from the state and the city related to the construction, as well as the other operating revenue there. You can see the realized gain on investments, the better financial markets, the interest rates are higher. And then your depreciation, the last non-operating expense increased, again, $107 million of additions. They are being depreciated. So it's probably a full year next year. So you would almost anticipate depreciation and amortization increasing as well next year with a full year depreciation on the additions this year. But change in that position overall was $54 million. Last year was about 63 million. But again, a lot of it last year was a higher appropriation revenue number. And then it works down to your net position at the end of the year, a little over $1 billion, and that agrees to the amount on the previous page. Does anyone have any specific questions after going through the draft financial statements or the summary that we prepared today?
You see that volatility on the pension numbers, and as I mentioned, we have no control over that. That is a number that's dictated to us. Yeah, and what happened is that the state has gone from about 103% funding level in its pension funds to 90% level in its pension funds. And they don't do any smoothing of gains or losses from year to year. Most states take those gains or losses over a 5-year period and average it out so you don't have as much volatility. But New York throws it all in. So you see that's why there's such a difference. And you look over the 3 years, you see that volatility. That's what's going on there. And I expect it to be good next year, to be better next year. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, they measured it about 3 months ago, so I guess we'll see how it pops out. Because looking at those 2 years, the 2022 was measured as of 3/31. I'm sorry, your 2023 number was measured as of 3/31/22, and then this year's amount was measured as of 3/31/2023. So, and the easiest way to kind of think about those is you think about how your 401k was doing, how any of your investments were doing, and back in 2022, everything was fine and dandy. 2023, everyone was hurting a little bit. You're looking at your 401k, thinking you might have to work another few years, and the pension plan kind of did the exact same thing. And as Kim mentioned, was it about 104% funded? So because of that, New York State assigned everybody an asset. And then when 1 year later, everything dropped down, all of a sudden the pension fund was actually underfunded. So because of that, they send out letters to everyone saying, you now have to record a liability for this, meaning you have to record your proportionate share of the underfunding. And that's what happened when it was only about 90% funded. So it's expected to vary every single year. And again, it's something where every year you just basically get a letter from New York State saying, record this number. You can't question it. You can't record any revenue that you're going to use to pay this eventually. Because realistically, the only thing that the trust is going to be responsible for is their normal annual payments. This large number that goes on there, your large liability or asset, it realistically doesn't affect operations at all. Because again, the only thing you're actually going to pay is the annual payments that you always make every year, no matter what.
And that's the point that I was just about to make. Every year we do make our fully retired annual contribution. And the measure there that's really important is that required contribution as a percentage of your payroll. And that went down this year from the previous year. So
we also had a 1.8 million pension asset last year, which we don't have this year. So does that reflect an even greater?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's because of the funding level of the whole pension system went down from like 103 to 90%. So now it costs us more. It's a liability.
Okay.
It's a great liability there. It was before it was like made money off of it because they were overfunded.
Okay,
It's just.
And presumably,
Minimal.
we don't have the option of moving to, I mean, I assume we don't, of moving to something that's not a defined benefit, we're just subject to whatever the state and city.
We could, I mean, so the trust could, the board many years ago elected to have us participate as a local participant in the pension system. At this point, I think changing that would be a very radical move.
And that's my point too, that it hasn't really been, even though there's this volatility, it hasn't really affected us negatively on an operational standpoint because that annual required contribution as percentage of the payroll has actually come down a little bit. It's been fairly steady. So
Right.
that's
So you're
the one
insulated.
that really hits us.
Right.
Yeah.
This, on the last page, the realized gain on investments, that's double from 23 to 24. And what's the correlation between the fact that we had a loss on our investments on the previous page? I guess, what is the realized gain on investments?
So that's kind of all the interest you earn. So, during later 2023, early 2024, interest rates were doing great. The market's been doing great. So because of that, both your money market accounts as well as your investments themselves actually did phenomenally. They made a good chunk of change. The trust was kind of doing a lot of positions in various treasury bills and other things like that. And, again, we did issue a report on the investments, note everything was in compliance with the New York State, the CRR. So it was really just everything kind of opening, closing, making money on it. Additional items you had, which was paying out dividends. They were also paying out, additional, I guess, just positions being opened and increased at larger amounts. Now, I know you mentioned that investments themselves did go down, and that's because during the year, $10 million was transferred out of investments into normal cash. So overall, the investments, again, did make a substantial amount of money, but within $10 million being drawn out and it decreasing only, for example, if I go back up to your investments, $10 million being drawn out, yet the investment balance only decreased 2.3 million, shows that it made approximately 7.7 million was the actual how much it was made this year within your investments.
FYI, in the current fiscal year, that money was put back into the investments and then some. So we put 15 million back because we had all these one-time payments. So
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna ask a related question, just, and I won't take a sideways, but just for my education, I probably should know this. So I actually was a little surprised that we've got an investment portfolio as large as 162 million. How is that managed? Do we have an investment policy statement and we manage it at the Hudson River Park entity level?
PFM Asset Management is our asset manager, and so we, along with PFM, make all the investment decisions.
Including
and the
the,
investment policy.
okay, including the asset allocation, strategy, all of that? Okay,
Yes, we're very, very
Conservative.
as a public entity, we're very, very restricted. We keep everything short, so there's
Okay.
really no, not that much interest rate risk. We hold our policy so far as to hold everything to maturity, so it's just rolling it
Gotcha.
over, so we're not incurring market risk.
So Kim, you would be able to share with ID or anybody
Okay.
else interested what
Right.
the allocations are.
Okay. But there is an investment policy statement, and is that reviewed by the board?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
It was at you missed the last meeting.
Okay.
The last meeting.
All right, thank you.
And I'll give you the year-end, PFM prepared a year-end statement for us, we'll give us after that. But it's a treasuries, because it's been the best game in town.
It's been a good time for it.
Are there public-private partnerships or just like concessions? Is that what that means?
No, those are just two major leases that we have. One is Chelsea Pierce, and the other one is Pier 57.
So those are the leases.
Those are the two leases.
We have plenty of concessions, but they are not, they don't qualify in that definition of the Gatsby standard, which others here can better describe.
It could be month to month, like you terminate with 30-day notice or small concession.
Do not qualify. So we even had some regular leases that didn't qualify because they were month to month, because they weren't long-term.
So these are the 97 years that we were talking
These
about.
are, those two wasn't long. Yeah, one's Chelsea Pierce is like 56 and Pier 57 is 97.
And anything that doesn't qualify there shows up in lease rents under gas period. So
If it fits their qualifications too. So the ones that don't show up there are ones that are month to month, ones that are cancelable.
Ones that are cancelable, that's a major factor in this. So if the trust has the authority to cancel, and it has discretion essentially, which we do build into any of our shorter term concessions and things, that's what makes them ineligible for reporting certain of these gas fees, as I understand it.
so where do those revenues show up?
They're not in gas, so the GASB calculations we kind of pull out separately because my words, not, I'm sure the auditor's words, but I consider them sort of funny money because it's essentially, it's calculating the value of the entire duration of these very long-term leases, but since the trust is not allowed to bond or borrow in any way against them, it's a disclosure that's required. I'm looking at our auditors to correct me if I'm incorrect, but it's a mandatory disclosure, but it is not.
Substantive.
So, yeah, right, so instead we have separate calculations under lease revenue, straightforward lease revenue.
That's,
Not actuarial, but.
Right, so,
Got it.
so Michael, like the straightforward lease revenue,
yeah.
it's where the actual,
33.
yeah.
And that had one, 8.5 million one-time payment in it, and then in the fees, is where the other.
The rest of it
8.5,
is-
the Amtrak
Right,
payment,
so 17 across both of them.
17.2 across both, right?
So the fact that our lease rents under GASB 87 effectively doubled, it's really, as you put it, funny money.
Yeah.
So
And
it
in
sounds
fact,
very bad.
But in fact, our lease revenue looks like increased by roughly 50%, which is.
Yes, so that, so.
Which is not as impressive as doubling, but still impressive.
It is, so separate from the one-time payment from Chelsea Piers. There was the transaction or the lease within the garage that we discussed with you, yes. And frying pan, which has been here for a long time, we entered into a new lease with them this year that made that qualify as a lease as opposed to where it was previously.
Do we carry any of the Intrepid's responsibilities on our balance sheet in terms of like their capital responsibility?
No.
Okay.
No, because there's no exchange of value. So just so you know, that 55.9 million in total operating revenue without the 7.
Where are you, Ken?
Well, the total
Which
operating,
page?
the third page, the top. 55.9 this year versus 35.3 last year, total general operating revenue. Without the 17.2 million of one-time payments would have been 38,778. So you compare that 38,778 to the 35,364 on an ongoing basis, really. Because the others are
That
non-recurring.
was the day payment they mentioned earlier.
Part of it, one was a transaction payment from Chelsea Piers under that lease, and then the other one was Hudson Television.
And he's met, so that's in.
Right.
It's another way.
I remember nice.
You wanted to say something, Jeff, I think?
Yeah, I would take
sorry.
that one step further, guys. Look at Schedule 1. Because to me, that's without all the accrual crap, like that's the real, it's not cash because it's still GAAP.
Yep.
But that's the schedule to look at on how we actually did without all the retirement stuff, the lease accounting, all the other crap. And so on a bottom line basis, an NOI in my parlance, the 32.7 compares to last year's 16.4, which is essentially flat, slightly down after the 2 one-time payments. And then the next one, Schedule 2, it is where we put, our money in for capital maintenance, less, what we're getting reimbursed.
Right.
These
That gets
schedules,
it more murky, but those two schedules to me show the revenue side of things.
exactly, schedules 1, 2, 3, and 4 really reflect the budgetary results that we have, and we normally show that you're used to looking at. We add that.
So this is basically actual money in and out, like even on a flow basis. So this is basically what we have paid or we are going to pay within the fiscal year. So this is that's a better understanding of what we are doing. Rather than including Gatsby and making our net position to be $1 billion.
Right.
Really, it's not $1 billion because if it's move all Gatsby 8794, it's much less.
And Jeff Jones, I think you were trying to say something too, or was it Rob?
No, it was when you said Jeff, I thought you were talking to me because I just coughed. Sorry.
The flying pen reference that you made,
Yeah,
so that's now considered lease revenue, but previously, where did that show up?
it was lease revenue on an annual basis, but it wasn't included in GASB because it was all a variable payment. And in GASB, the GASB 87
Yeah.
and 94, it's only the fixed payments that are calculated. So those calculations are actually not done on all the payments that we receive from them, only the fixed ones that we receive from them. So because there was no fixed payment associated with it, it wasn't included in the GASB calculation, but the actual revenue always showed up in the fixed revenues.
Okay, so when we look at general operating revenue, we look at lease revenues and it goes from 22 to 33. I think what I hear you saying is that there was the tunnel payment and the Chelsea Piers payment that account for really all of that $10 million increase. It's not the frying pan because frying pan was always there.
Yeah. Yes,
It's one of
that was in the, those are in, there's another place in this where the three new leases, I guess it's a gas.
Right.
It's classic car also now had to go into a bucket. Until the spring. We've reached a daytime.
But they're paying us full,
You're
paying
paying.
a lot, they're paying a lot.
Plus they maintain it, you know, keep the utilities. I mean, it's, in some ways, it's,
Yeah,
exactly
no, I'd
that,
rather
you know.
have a
Now,
use of
we
something.
have a good
such as we're
relationship
getting
now,
paid.
so we do have a much better relationship.
Okay.
So it's better, yeah.
Super.
Anything else, folks?
No, we'd just like to say it was a pleasure working with management, Noreen, Kim, Sikander, and everyone else there this year. I worked on the audit years ago before I became a partner, and it's amazing to see the progress down there. I know Noreen gave us a little tour, and I really enjoyed seeing the progress over the. Well, it's been probably 20 years since I was down there just touring around in the park. And management does an excellent job. I mean, the MD&A is one of the better ones that when I review it. I mean, just the disclosures and the progress and the improvements. Management does a great job in that MD&A telling their story of the trust. So it was a pleasure working with everybody this year.
Well, thank you.
None of that is a surprise. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I had a question also, which is, as a part of this audit, would you normally, I mean, so I'm used to seeing something around management letter comments or comments from the auditors around, was that something that you would have done? Are there no management letter comments? Is that what I'm?
Yeah, we take a look at the internal controls, anything that we see that would warrant a letter for improvements. Sometimes it may be something verbal regarding procedure or policy that we discuss with management, but if it rose to the level of a improvement that would go into a letter, we would do that. But there was no management letter recommendation this year. The internal controls were functioning as planned and as tested. So there was no additional letter this year.
That's fantastic. Congrats.
It's been like this since fiscal year 2014, so we haven't received a
Don't jinx it.
And before we go, since we have a quorum, can you just say, I think you guys signed something, you just say the next steps are to finalize this, and since we have a quorum for the
Yes.
committee.
Yes.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. No, you go ahead, Rob.
Sure. Once once the board approves the financial statements, management, we will send to them a management representation letter for signature. And there's maybe 20 or 25 different bullet points or numbers on there that detail things out, like there's no subsequent events. I think Jeff, you said that we're missing one attorney letter that we're expecting today.
Yes.
So that we can issue, once it's approved, we'll send the representation letter. It gets dated. When we get that returned, as long as we have all the attorney letters, we will get you a PDF today or tomorrow, depending on when that letter comes in. And then if you require bound copies, we get those sent out as well. That's the next step to approving the financial statements.
So we're ostensibly approving it in this meeting,
Yes.
subject to finalizing the final steps, signing the rep letter and all of that. And then one more question, which makes perfect sense. One more question. Who are the primary users of our financial statements, as we understand it? I mean, how much of this, like, what?
So what I would say after all my years doing this is that while all of this is on our website along with many other
Yeah.
financial documents, and we repeatedly remind people
Right.
that all of this is on our website, almost no one looks at it.
It's not atypical.
We don't borrow money,
Right.
we don't, we don't bond, we don't do any of that, so.
However, we try very hard, and to the point that was just made about the MD&A, we try to write these in a way that makes it within the context of audited financial statements that are not everyone's first language, including my own. We do try to make the language as straightforward as we can with respect, including very importantly with respect to the kind of signature aspect of our challenge, which is funding capital maintenance, funding the continuing care of the park. So
The way these financials have long sort of lived has proved incredibly useful in public discussions, also in terms of how the park is being able to educate, push back. And so that is really sort of, even though nobody's sort of clicking to
Right,
download,
right.
the fact that the consistency of them being there, and that they
Right.
quickly be referenced is
Right.
very important.
So this is part of our, we're a public authority, New York State Public Authority, and there's the Paris reporting requirements that we have, it's a public authority.
reporting
Reporting information system, there you go.
Paris.
Paris, so,
the bad times.
so, June 30th, this is just one of the things that we're required to file. There's a whole litany of things. A list of our procurement contracts for the years, this financial report investment report that I will give you. Help me out. What
Does
else?
EFPR do all that, or do we do that internally?
We do. We
I
do.
take care of all of that. So we are done with the procurement report. It's basically whatever we have done so far in the fiscal year. That's what we reported. Other things are much easier, which is just uploading the financial audit and internal
It's all based on
report.
this, right?
Yeah, so it was basically, it will be done within a day or two after receiving this financial statement. We should all be done.
So the state controller's office maintains a public database that has all this information for all the different public authorities. And anybody can go there to get it, as well as we're required to put it on our website.
And we have to file the preliminary budget. The cycle for our approvals is based on the Paris requirement. In large measure. So the preliminary, the authority's budget office, so there's a filing required in January. You have to upload the preliminary budget. On certain dates and the adopted budget and other things like that. So there are other documents besides those related to the audit.
It's also, we list all staff, all employee salaries, benefits, we list all the board members. We list lobby contacts, our real estate, and each sale of personal property. Yes, everything's uploaded and available to the public.
Mission statement, accomplishments,
Yeah.
various other
Yeah.
things.
Got it, thank you.
So
So
Kim,
we
you wanna
vote?
make a
I
motion
was gonna
for?
say, do we need to make a
Randall
motion,
to-
move to
Yeah.
recommend approval of the draft audit as proposed? Is that an appropriate motion?
Sure, Kim, is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Dissent?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to our colleagues up north. We hope that the weather is kind to you and appreciate the time you and your staff spent with us and for your support of us.
Thank you,
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
This is
Nice
helpful.
talking.
No management under Noreen.
I know, since 2014, he's like, this is not new.